General Marcus Wellington had served his country for 35 years. His uniform bore the weight of countless medals, each one telling a story of courage, dedication, and unwavering loyalty to the crown. At 62, he stood as tall and proud as the day he first enlisted, his silver hair neatly combed beneath his military cap, his posture straight as an arrow. The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as General Wellington approached the main entrance. Today was different from his usual visits to brief the royal family on national security matters. Today he carried news that would change everything for the young prince who had just completed his military training. Prince Alexander, barely 25 years old, had spent the last 2 years in rigorous military preparation. Unlike many royals before him, Alexander had insisted on experiencing real military life. He slept in barracks with common soldiers, ate the same meals, and endured the same harsh training that every recruit faced. His determination to prove himself worthy had earned him respect among his peers and instructors alike. General Wellington remembered the first day Prince Alexander arrived at the training camp. The young man had walked in without fanfare, carrying his own bags, refusing any special treatment. Many expected him to quit within weeks, unable to handle the demanding physical and mental challenges. But Alexander surprised everyone. He woke up earlier than required, trained harder than necessary, and never once complained about the difficult conditions. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. The somewhat sheltered prince who entered the camp emerged as a confident, capable young officer. His instructors praised his tactical thinking, his ability to lead under pressure, and most importantly, his genuine concern for the welfare of his fellow soldiers. Alexander had proven that royal blood did not exempt him from hard work and sacrifice. Now, as General Wellington walked through the familiar corridors of the palace, he reflected on the conversation he had had with the king just days earlier. His Majesty had been clear about his wishes regarding Alexander's future role in the military. The decision would not only affect the prince, but would also set a precedent for future generations of the royal family. The palace guards nodded respectfully as the general passed. These men knew him well, having worked alongside him during various state functions and security briefings over the years. Wellington had always maintained good relationships with all ranks of personnel, understanding that respect must flow both ways to create an effective chain of command. As he approached the royal apartments, General Wellington encountered Captain Harrison, the head of the Royal Guard. Harrison was a veteran soldier himself, having served in several overseas missions before accepting his prestigious position, protecting the royal family. The two men had mutual respect for each other, built over years of professional interaction. "Good morning, General," Captain Harrison said, snapping to attention with a crisp salute. "At ease, Captain," Wellington replied, returning the salute with practiced precision. "I trust everything is secure this morning?" "Yes, sir." "The family is in the breakfast room. Prince Alexander returned from his morning run about an hour ago." Wellington nodded approvingly. Even after completing his formal training, Alexander maintained the discipline he had learned. The prince's commitment to physical fitness and routine impressed everyone who witnessed it. Such dedication spoke well of his character and suggested he would handle whatever responsibilities lay ahead. The conversation with Captain Harrison reminded Wellington of similar exchanges he had had with countless officers throughout his career. Military protocol demanded certain formalities, but genuine leadership required building relationships based on trust and mutual respect. These principles had guided him through decades of service, from his early days as a young lieutenant to his current position as one of the country's most senior military officials. As Wellington continued toward his appointment, he passed portraits of previous monarchs and military leaders who had shaped the nation's history. Each face reminded him of the weight of tradition and the importance of maintaining standards that had been established over centuries. Yet he also understood that traditions must sometimes evolve to remain relevant in changing times. The news he carried today represented such an evolution. Prince Alexander's performance during his military training had exceeded all expectations. His instructors reported that he demonstrated natural leadership abilities, tactical intelligence, and most importantly, genuine empathy for those under his command. These qualities made him uniquely qualified for a role that would bridge the gap between the monarchy and the military. General Wellington paused outside the breakfast room, taking a moment to organize his thoughts. Inside, the royal family was enjoying their morning meal, unaware that their conversation would soon take a significant turn. The king had already been briefed on the proposal, but Prince Alexander remained unaware of the decision that had been made regarding his future. The general's weathered hands straightened his uniform one final time. His medals caught the morning, light streaming through the tall palace windows, each decoration representing a moment when duty had demanded everything he could give. Today would add another chapter to his long career, but more importantly, it would mark the beginning of a new chapter for Prince Alexander. The sound of gentle conversation and clinking china drifted through the partially open door. Wellington could hear the prince's voice among others, discussing current events with the intelligence and thoughtfulness that had impressed his military instructors. This young man had proven himself capable of handling responsibility far beyond what many expected from someone of his age and background. Taking a deep breath, General Wellington knocked softly on the door and awaited permission to enter. The message he carried would change not only Prince Alexander's life, but would also establish a new tradition within the royal family. The young prince had earned this opportunity through his own merit, dedication, and unwavering commitment to serving his country. The morning sun continued to climb higher in the sky, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow throughout the palace corridors, as if nature itself was acknowledging that significant changes were about to unfold within these ancient walls. "Enter," came the king's familiar voice from within the breakfast room. General Wellington stepped through the doorway and immediately snapped to attention, offering a sharp salute to the assembled royal family. The king sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, while Queen Isabella occupied her customary place to his right. Prince Alexander sat across from his mother, still wearing his athletic clothing from his morning exercise, his face glowing, with the healthy flush that came from physical exertion. "Your Majesty, Your Highness," Wellington said formally, maintaining his rigid posture until the king gestured for him to relax. "Please, General, join us," King Edward said warmly, indicating an empty chair. "We were just discussing Alexander's observations about the training exercises he witnessed yesterday." Prince Alexander looked up from his breakfast with genuine enthusiasm in his eyes. "General Wellington, I wanted to thank you again for arranging my visit to observe the new tactical training program. The innovation your instructors have implemented is remarkable. The way they've integrated traditional military strategy with modern technology is exactly what our forces need to stay competitive." Wellington felt a surge of pride at the prince's words. Alexander's ability to grasp complex military concepts and offer thoughtful analysis had impressed every officer who worked with him. Unlike many royals who might offer empty praise, Alexander's comments demonstrated genuine understanding and insight. "The credit belongs to Colonel Matthews and his team," Wellington replied modestly. "However, I believe your observations about improving communication between different units were particularly valuable. Several officers mentioned that your suggestions during the debrief session showed remarkable tactical thinking." Queen Isabella smiled at her son with obvious maternal pride. "Alexander has always had a gift for seeing solutions that others might miss," she said. "Even as a child, he would approach problems from unexpected angles." The king nodded in agreement, but Wellington could see something else in his expression. A mixture of pride and concern that suggested deeper considerations about his son's future. This was the moment Wellington had been preparing for during his walk through the palace corridors. "Actually, Your Majesty," Wellington said, "Prince Alexander's performance throughout his military training has been the subject of considerable discussion among the senior staff. His instructors have submitted reports that I believe warrant your immediate attention." Alexander looked puzzled, setting down his fork and giving Wellington his full attention. "Is there some problem with my service record?" he asked, a note of concern creeping into his voice. Wellington smiled reassuringly. "Quite the opposite, Your Highness. The reports consistently praise your leadership abilities, your strategic thinking, and most importantly, your genuine care for the welfare of your fellow soldiers. In fact, your performance has been so exceptional that it has prompted us to consider a proposal that would be unprecedented in the history of our military. The room fell silent except for the gentle ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Even the usual sounds from the palace staff moving through the corridors seemed muted, as if the entire building was holding its breath in anticipation of Wellington's next words. King Edward leaned forward slightly, though Wellington suspected he already knew what was coming. Their private conversation several days earlier had laid the groundwork for this moment, but the final decision would need Alexander's complete understanding and agreement. The senior military leadership has unanimously recommended that Prince Alexander be offered a permanent commission as a Royal Guard commander, Wellington continued. This position would be unique in our history, combining the traditional ceremonial duties of protecting the royal family with active military leadership responsibilities. Alexander's eyes widened in surprise. This was clearly not what he had expected to hear during what he had assumed would be a routine breakfast conversation. His mother reached across the table to place her hand gently on his arm, offering silent support for whatever decision he would need to make. The role would require you to work directly with Captain Harrison and his team, Wellington explained. But it would also involve active participation in military planning, training oversight, and field operations when necessary. Essentially, you would serve as a bridge between the monarchy and the military, helping to strengthen the bonds between the crown and those who serve to protect our nation. The prince sat quietly for several moments, processing the implications of what he had just heard. Wellington could see the wheels turning in the young man's mind as he considered not just the honor being offered, but the enormous responsibility that would come with it. "This has never been done before?" Alexander asked finally. "Never," Wellington confirmed. "Royal family members have served in the military, of course, but always in traditional roles with clear separations between their royal duties and their military service. What we're proposing would integrate both aspects of your identity into a single unified role." Queen Isabella squeezed her son's arm gently. "The decision is entirely yours to make," she said softly. "Your father and I will support whatever choice you feel is right." King Edward nodded in agreement. "General Wellington and his staff have made this recommendation based purely on merit," he added. "Your royal status may have opened the door for this opportunity to be created, but your performance and capabilities are what made it possible." Alexander looked around the table at each person present, understanding that this moment would define not only his own future, but potentially set precedents for generations to come. The weight of tradition pressed against the possibility of innovation, and he found himself at the center of a decision that would affect far more than just his personal career path. "What would be expected of me in terms of training and preparation?" he asked, his questions revealing the serious consideration he was giving to the proposal. Wellington appreciated the prince's practical approach to such a momentous decision. Additional specialized training would be required, of course. You would need to master protocols that don't currently exist, since this role would be entirely new. We would be creating the procedures and expectations together, based on the unique nature of the position. The morning sun had climbed higher, filling the breakfast room with golden light that seemed to emphasize the historic nature of the conversation taking place within its walls. Prince Alexander stood up from the breakfast table and walked to the large window overlooking the palace gardens. The morning activities were in full swing below. Gardeners tending to the rose beds, maintenance staff ensuring everything was perfect, and in the distance he could see members of the Royal Guard conducting their morning patrol. These men would potentially be under his command if he accepted the unprecedented position being offered to him. "I need to understand something," Alexander said, still gazing out the window. "Would this role carry real authority, or would it be primarily ceremonial with actual decisions being made by others?" General Wellington appreciated the directness of the question. It showed that the prince understood the potential pitfalls of accepting a position that might appear impressive but lack substance. "The authority would be completely real," Wellington replied firmly. "You would have genuine command responsibilities, make tactical decisions that affect operations, and be held accountable for the performance of your units, just like any other military commander." Alexander turned back to face the room, his expression serious and thoughtful. And the men who would serve under me? How do you believe they would respond to taking orders from someone who was born into the royal family, rather than earning his rank through traditional military advancement? This question revealed the depth of Alexander's understanding of military culture and his concern for maintaining the respect and effectiveness that were essential for successful leadership. Wellington had anticipated this concern and had spent considerable time discussing it with his senior staff. That was one of our primary considerations when developing this proposal, Wellington admitted. However, your performance during training has already answered that question to some degree. The soldiers who served alongside you during your preparation consistently reported that they forgot about your royal status because you proved yourself through your actions rather than your title. Queen Isabella smiled at this assessment of her son's character. She had watched Alexander struggle with questions about his identity and worth throughout his childhood, always wondering whether people treated him with respect because of who he was or because of what he had accomplished. His military training had apparently provided him with the answer he had been seeking. There's another aspect to consider, King Edward added thoughtfully. This role would also serve an important, symbolic function for our people. Citizens who see a member of the royal family actively serving in military leadership would understand that the monarchy takes national defense seriously and is willing to share in the risks and responsibilities that come with protecting our nation. Alexander nodded slowly, recognizing the political and social implications of the position. The monarchy's relationship with the general population had evolved significantly over the years, and public perception of royal relevance and contribution to society remained an ongoing consideration for the family. What about the practical aspects of daily life? Alexander asked. Would I live in barracks like other officers? Or would special accommodations be made because of my royal status? Wellington had discussed this very question with Captain Harrison and other senior officers. Initially, you would maintain your current living arrangements here at the palace, he explained. However, there would be times when military operations or training exercises would require you to live alongside your fellow officers under field conditions. No special accommodations would be made during such periods. You would share the same facilities, eat the same food, and face the same challenges as everyone else. This answer seemed to satisfy Alexander's concerns about maintaining the credibility he had worked so hard to establish during his initial military training. He had proven to himself and others that he could endure the same hardships as any soldier, and he clearly did not want to lose that hard-earned respect. I would like to speak with Captain Harrison and some of the other officers who would be directly affected by this decision, Alexander said. If I'm going to accept this responsibility, I need to know that the people I would be working with believe in the concept and trust my ability to fulfill the role effectively. General Wellington nodded approvingly. I've already arranged for you to meet with the senior staff this afternoon if you're interested in moving forward. Captain Harrison specifically requested the opportunity to discuss the proposal with you directly. Alexander's respect for seeking input from those who would be most affected by his decision impressed everyone present. It demonstrated the kind of leadership style that put the needs of the team ahead of personal ambition or ego. Exactly the qualities that had made his instructors recommend him for this unique position. There's one more thing we should discuss, Wellington continued. This role would inevitably attract significant media attention, both domestically and internationally. The press would scrutinize your every decision, looking for signs of favoritism, incompetence, or any indication that royal privilege was affecting military operations. You would need to be prepared for that level of public examination. Alexander had grown up in the public eye, but military service would bring a different kind of attention than the typical royal duties he had performed throughout his life. Military decisions could have life and death consequences, and any mistakes would be magnified by press coverage and public opinion. I've been thinking about that aspect since you first mentioned the proposal, Alexander replied. In some ways, the additional scrutiny might actually be beneficial. If the public can see that military decisions are being made based on merit and effectiveness rather than politics or favoritism, it might actually strengthen public confidence in our armed forces. Queen Isabella looked at her son with obvious admiration for his mature perspective on such a complex issue. The young man who had once worried about living up to his royal responsibilities had clearly developed into someone capable of seeing, beyond his own concerns, to consider broader implications for his country and its institutions. "The timeline for making this decision is flexible," Wellington assured him. "We understand that accepting this position would represent a major commitment, and we want you to have adequate time to consider all aspects thoroughly." Alexander returned to his seat at the breakfast table, but his untouched food had grown cold during the lengthy discussion. The magnitude of the opportunity and responsibility being offered to him was still sinking in, but his initial response suggested that he was seriously considering accepting the challenge. Later that afternoon, Prince Alexander made his way to the military headquarters building adjacent to the palace grounds. He had changed from his casual morning attire into his formal military dress uniform, the same one he had earned the right to wear through months of rigorous training and dedication. The weight of the fabric and the precision of each button and insignia reminded him of the transformation he had undergone during his service preparation. Captain Harrison was waiting in the briefing room along with several other senior officers whom Alexander recognized from various training exercises and ceremonial functions. The atmosphere was professional but noticeably tense, as everyone present understood they were participating in discussions that could fundamentally change military tradition. "Your Highness," Captain Harrison said, rising from his chair as Alexander entered the room. The other officers followed suit, offering crisp salutes that Alexander returned with equal precision. "Please, everyone, let's sit down and speak frankly," Alexander said, taking a seat at the conference table. "I'm here because General Wellington has presented me with an opportunity that I cannot take lightly. Before making any decisions, I need to understand how this proposal would actually work from your perspectives." Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, who had been one of Alexander's training supervisors, leaned forward in her chair. "Your Highness, if I may speak candidly, when you first arrived for training, many of us were skeptical about your commitment and ability to handle the demands of military life. You proved us wrong through your actions and dedication." Alexander appreciated her honesty. "And now, what are your concerns about this new role?" "The practical challenges are significant," admitted Major Robert Thompson, head of tactical operations. "Coordinating security protocols with operational requirements would require developing entirely new procedures. We would essentially be creating a new branch of military service with no historical precedent to guide us." Captain Harrison nodded in agreement. "The men respect you because you earned their respect," he said. "But commanding the Royal Guard, while simultaneously being a member of the royal family, creates potential conflicts that we would need to navigate very carefully." Alexander had anticipated these concerns and had spent considerable time thinking about potential solutions. "What if we established clear protocols that separate my royal duties from my military responsibilities?" he suggested. "Specific times, when I would be acting purely in my capacity as a military officer, with no consideration given to my royal status?" "That might work for some situations," Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell replied. "But what happens when military security concerns conflict with royal protocol requirements? Who would have the authority to make final decisions in such cases?" This question highlighted one of the most complex aspects of the proposed role. Traditional military command structure depended on clear chains of authority and unambiguous decision-making processes. Adding royal considerations to military operations could potentially compromise the efficiency and effectiveness that were essential for successful missions. "General Wellington and I discussed this exact issue," Alexander said. "The proposal includes provisions for establishing separate chains of command for different types of operations. During purely military activities, standard military protocol would apply. During royal security operations, traditional Royal Guard procedures would govern decision-making." Sergeant Major James Wilson, the most senior enlisted man present, spoke up for the first time during the meeting. "Your Highness, the enlisted men who served with you during training would follow you anywhere," he said simply. "You proved that you care about their welfare and that you're willing to share their hardships. That kind of leadership is rare, regardless of background." Alexander felt a warmth spread through his chest at these words. The respect of enlisted personnel had been one of his primary goals during training, understanding that genuine military leadership required the trust and confidence of soldiers at every level. However, Sergeant Major Wilson continued, they would also expect you to make the hard decisions when necessary, even if those decisions might conflict with what people might expect from a member of the royal family. Military leadership sometimes requires choices that aren't popular or comfortable. This comment touched on something Alexander had been considering since his conversation with General Wellington that morning. Effective military leadership often demanded decisions that prioritized mission success and personnel safety over political considerations or public relations concerns. Can you give me an example of the kind of situation you're thinking about? Alexander asked. Major Thompson answered this question. Suppose we received intelligence about a potential threat to a member of the royal family, but addressing that threat would require deploying resources that were also needed for another critical military operation. As Royal Guard commander, you would need to make a decision that might put either your family or other military personnel at increased risk. Alexander could see how such situations would create unprecedented dilemmas that no military leader had ever faced before. The proposed role would require him to develop decision-making frameworks that balanced competing loyalties and responsibilities in ways that had never been tested. Those are exactly the kinds of challenges that make this opportunity both exciting and terrifying, Alexander admitted. But they're also the kinds of challenges that could lead to innovations in military leadership that might benefit our forces in unexpected ways. Captain Harrison smiled slightly at this response. That's the kind of perspective that convinced us you might actually succeed in this role, he said. Most people would focus on the problems and risks. You're looking for the opportunities and potential benefits. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell pulled out a folder containing several documents. We've prepared some preliminary operational frameworks that might address some of the concerns we've discussed, she said. These are just initial concepts, but they might help you understand how this position could function in practical terms. Alexander accepted the folder gratefully, understanding that the time and effort these officers had invested in developing these materials demonstrated their genuine belief in the viability of the proposed role. Their willingness to work through complex challenges rather than simply dismissing the idea showed the kind of professional dedication that made the military effective. I want to thank all of you for your candid feedback and your willingness to consider something that has never been attempted before, Alexander said, standing up from the conference table. Your insights have helped me understand both the potential and the challenges much more clearly. As the meeting concluded and the officers began to file out of the briefing room, Sergeant Major Wilson approached Alexander privately. Your Highness, there's something else you should know, he said quietly. The enlisted personnel have been talking about this proposal since rumors started circulating. They're excited about the possibility of having you as their commander. They believe you understand what it means to serve, and they trust you to fight for their interests. Alexander was moved by this revelation. Knowing that he had earned the confidence of the soldiers who would serve under him, provided the final piece of information he needed to make his decision. The next morning arrived with unusual significance for everyone at the palace. Prince Alexander had requested a meeting with General Wellington to provide his decision regarding the Royal Guard commander position. Word had spread quietly through the military ranks, and there was a sense of anticipation that seemed to permeate the entire complex. Alexander had spent most of the previous evening in his private study, reviewing the operational frameworks that Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell had provided and carefully considering every aspect of the opportunity before him. The weight of the decision extended far beyond his personal career. It would set precedents that could affect the monarchy and military for generations to come. General Wellington arrived at the palace earlier than usual, carrying with him the official documents that would formalize Alexander's appointment if the prince chose to accept. He had served long enough to recognize historic moments when they occurred, and he understood that today's meeting would be remembered as a turning point in military tradition. Good morning, General, Alexander said as Wellington was shown into the prince's private office. Thank you for accommodating this early meeting. I know you have many other responsibilities that require your attention. Your Highness, this decision takes priority over everything else on my schedule, Wellington replied honestly. The implications of your choice will affect not only your own future but the future relationship between the Crown and our military forces. Alexander gestured for Wellington to take a seat in one of the comfortable chairs near the fireplace, creating a more informal atmosphere than their previous meeting in the formal breakfast room. The prince had learned during his military training that important conversations often required relaxed settings to encourage complete honesty and open communication. "I've made my decision," Alexander said without preamble. "I want to accept the position of Royal Guard Commander, but I have several conditions that I believe are essential for the role to succeed." Wellington felt a surge of satisfaction at the prince's acceptance, but he also appreciated Alexander's thoughtful approach to ensuring the position would be structured properly. "I'm listening," he said simply. "First, I want it clearly established that during military operations my royal status provides no special protections or considerations," Alexander began. "If I make poor decisions or fail to meet the standards expected of any military commander, I should face the same consequences that any other officer would face, including the possibility of being relieved of command." Wellington nodded approvingly. This condition demonstrated Alexander's understanding that credibility in military leadership came through accountability rather than privilege. "That can certainly be formalized in the official appointment documents," he agreed. "Second, I want to establish a rotation system where I spend significant time living and working alongside the enlisted personnel under my command," Alexander continued, "not just during training exercises but during routine operations as well. I believe effective leadership requires understanding the daily challenges that soldiers face." This request impressed Wellington even more than the first condition. Many officers, particularly those from privileged backgrounds, tried to minimize their contact with the practical realities of military life. Alexander was specifically asking for more exposure to those realities. "Third, I want to implement a formal feedback system that allows soldiers at every level to provide honest assessments of my performance as their commander," Alexander said. "Anonymous evaluations that go directly to you and other senior officers, so that problems can be identified and addressed before they compromise unit effectiveness." Wellington was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of what Alexander was proposing. These conditions went far beyond what would typically be expected or required from any military appointment. They demonstrated a level of commitment to excellence and accountability that was rare at any level of leadership. "Your Highness, these conditions are not only acceptable, they're admirable," Wellington said finally. "They show exactly the kind of leadership philosophy that convinced us to offer you this position in the first place." Alexander smiled with obvious relief. "There's one more thing," he said. "I want to begin my service with a comprehensive tour of all our military installations, spending time with units throughout our forces to understand their capabilities, challenges, and needs. I believe this position should serve as a bridge between the royal family and our military. But I can't fulfill that function effectively without first-hand knowledge of what our soldiers experience." Wellington was genuinely impressed by the thoroughness of Alexander's planning. The prince had clearly thought beyond the immediate responsibilities of his new role to consider how he could maximize his effectiveness and contribution to the military as a whole. "I can arrange for such a tour to begin within the month," Wellington said. "Colonel Matthews has been developing a comprehensive itinerary that would expose you to every aspect of our military operations, from basic training facilities to advanced technical installations." Alexander stood up and walked to his desk where he had prepared a handwritten letter. "I've written a formal acceptance of the position," he said, handing the document to Wellington. "But I wanted to discuss the conditions with you first to ensure we were in complete agreement about expectations and procedures." Wellington accepted the letter and scanned its contents quickly. The document was professionally written but also carried a personal tone that reflected Alexander's genuine enthusiasm for the challenges ahead. It concluded with a commitment to serve with honor and dedication that Wellington found both moving and inspiring. "There's something else we should discuss," Wellington said. "The formal announcement of your appointment will generate significant public interest. We'll need to coordinate with the palace communications staff to ensure the public understands both the historic nature of this position and the serious qualifications that led to your selection." Alexander had anticipated this requirement as well. I've already spoken with the communications team about developing materials that focus on the military aspects of the appointment rather than the royal elements, he said. I want people to understand that this position was offered based on performance and capability, not birthright. The conversation was interrupted by a soft knock on the office door. Alexander's aide entered and announced that Captain Harrison had requested a brief meeting if the prince's schedule permitted. Alexander looked to Wellington, who nodded encouragingly. "Please send Captain Harrison in," Alexander instructed. Captain Harrison entered the office and immediately noticed the official documents on the desk between Wellington and Alexander. His expression suggested that he had already surmised the nature of their discussion. "Your Highness General Wellington," Harrison said formally, "I wanted to inform you that the Royal Guard personnel have prepared something special for this morning's ceremony, assuming the appointment moves forward as expected." Alexander looked puzzled. "What ceremony?" he asked. Wellington smiled mysteriously. "It's traditional to mark significant appointments with appropriate military recognition," he explained. "Captain Harrison and his team have arranged a small ceremony to formalize your new role." Alexander realized that the military leadership had been confident about his decision even before he had made the final commitment. The preparation required for such a ceremony would have taken considerable advance planning. An hour later, Prince Alexander found himself standing in the main courtyard of the palace, wearing his dress uniform with newly added insignia that designated his unprecedented rank as Royal Guard Commander. The morning sun cast sharp shadows across the assembled formation of Royal Guards, each soldier standing at perfect attention in their ceremonial uniforms. General Wellington stood beside a small podium that had been erected for the occasion, holding the official documents that would complete Alexander's appointment. Captain Harrison had positioned himself at the head of the Royal Guard formation, his expression serious but carrying a hint of pride that was noticeable to those who knew him well. The ceremony had been kept deliberately small and focused, involving only the military personnel who would be directly affected by Alexander's new role. This decision reflected the prince's preference for substance over spectacle, and his desire to emphasize the professional rather than the royal aspects of his appointment. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Wellington began, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard, "we are gathered here today to witness a historic moment in our military tradition. For the first time in our nation's history, a member of the royal family will assume active command responsibilities within our armed forces." Alexander stood at attention, feeling the weight of the moment and the eyes of every soldier in the formation. These men and women would now be under his command, trusting him to make decisions that could affect their safety, their effectiveness, and their careers. The responsibility was both humbling and energizing. Prince Alexander has earned this appointment through demonstrated excellence in military training, exceptional leadership capabilities, and unwavering commitment to the welfare of those who serve our nation, Wellington continued. His performance during preparation has shown that he possesses the qualities essential for effective military command: courage, intelligence, integrity, and genuine concern for his fellow soldiers. As Wellington spoke these words, Alexander noticed something unexpected in the formation of Royal Guards. Sergeant Peterson, a veteran soldier who had served alongside Alexander during his final training exercise, was struggling to maintain his rigid posture. There was something in the man's expression that suggested barely contained emotion. Wellington lifted the official appointment documents and began reading the formal language that would complete Alexander's transition from royal family member to military commander. The traditional words carried extra weight in this unprecedented context, as they established new precedents while honoring established military customs. "By the authority vested in me by His Majesty the King and the senior command of our armed forces, I hereby appoint Prince Alexander as Royal Guard Commander, with all the rights, responsibilities, and authority that accompany this position," Wellington declared. At this moment, Captain Harrison stepped forward with a ceremonial sword that would serve as the symbol of Alexander's new command authority. The weapon was not merely decorative. It was a functional military sword that had been specially crafted for this unique position. combining traditional royal symbols with military insignia. As Alexander reached out to accept the sword, something remarkable happened that no one had planned or expected. Sergeant Peterson, still standing in formation with the other royal guards, suddenly broke protocol in a way that stunned everyone present. Instead of maintaining his rigid attention posture, Peterson stepped forward slightly and offered a salute that was different from the standard military salute that protocol required. His hand position was correct, but his execution carried something extra, a depth of respect and genuine admiration that went beyond mere ceremonial obligation. The unexpected gesture created a moment of tension, as breaking formation during a formal ceremony was a serious breach of military discipline. Captain Harrison immediately noticed Peterson's action and began to move toward him to restore proper order. But before Harrison could intervene, something even more surprising occurred. The soldier standing next to Peterson also stepped forward and offered the same type of salute, one that carried obvious personal respect and enthusiasm rather than simple protocol compliance. Then another soldier followed suit, and then another. Within moments, the entire formation of royal guards had spontaneously modified their ceremonial posture to offer salutes that clearly communicated their genuine support for their new commander. General Wellington paused in the middle of the ceremony, uncertain how to respond to this unprecedented display. The soldiers were not being disrespectful or insubordinate, quite the opposite. They were expressing a level of enthusiasm and personal commitment that went far beyond what formal protocol typically allowed or encouraged. Captain Harrison stopped his movement toward Peterson and instead looked to Alexander for guidance. The prince now held the ceremonial sword in his hands, but the unexpected response from his new command had created a situation that required immediate leadership decision-making. Alexander looked out at the faces of the men and women before him. These soldiers had chosen to express their support in a way that risked disciplinary action, demonstrating that their commitment to him as their commander was genuine rather than merely obligatory. Their spontaneous gesture revealed something profound about the relationship he had built with military personnel during his training. Rather than restore formal protocol immediately, Alexander made a decision that would be remembered for years to come. He stepped forward toward the formation and offered his own salute in return, not the standard acknowledgement that commanders typically gave, but a salute that matched the personal respect and enthusiasm that his soldiers had shown him. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice carrying across the courtyard with clear sincerity. "Your confidence in my ability to lead means more to me than any formal ceremony could express. I promise you that I will work every day to prove worthy of the trust you have placed in me." The emotional intensity of the moment was palpable. Even General Wellington, who had witnessed countless military ceremonies throughout his long career, found himself moved by the genuine connection between Alexander and his new command. This was not the scripted interaction between authority figures and subordinates that characterized most formal appointments. Sergeant Peterson, who had initiated the spontaneous display of support, took another step forward. "Your Highness, Commander," he said, correcting himself to use Alexander's new military title, "we want you to know that we would follow you anywhere. You proved during training that you care about us as people, not just as soldiers. That kind of leadership is what we've been hoping for." Alexander felt a surge of emotion at these words. Throughout his life, he had wondered whether people respected him for who he was or simply because of his royal birth. The military training had begun to answer that question, but this moment provided complete confirmation that he had earned genuine respect through his actions and character. Captain Harrison stepped forward to restore some semblance of formal ceremony, but his expression showed that he too had been affected by the unexpected display of loyalty from his men. "Commander Alexander," he said, using the prince's new military title, "the Royal Guard stands ready to serve under your command." General Wellington cleared his throat and attempted to return to the formal ceremony script, but the spontaneous interaction had fundamentally changed the nature of the event. Instead of a traditional military appointment, it had become something more personal and meaningful, a mutual commitment between a leader and those he would command. "Commander Alexander," Wellington said, adapting his language to acknowledge what had just occurred. Your soldiers have expressed their confidence in your leadership in a way that speaks more powerfully than any formal ceremony could accomplish. I believe this demonstrates that you have already succeeded in earning what every military commander must have: the genuine trust and respect of those who will serve under you. Alexander turned back toward Wellington and completed the formal acceptance of his appointment, but everyone present understood that the real significance of the ceremony had come from the unexpected response of the soldiers rather than the official procedures. As the ceremony concluded and the formation began to disperse, individual soldiers approached Alexander to offer personal congratulations and express their enthusiasm about serving under his command. These conversations revealed the depth of respect he had earned and the high expectations they had for his leadership. The morning sun had climbed higher during the ceremony, and its warmth seemed to symbolize the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Alexander, but for the relationship between the monarchy and the military. The unprecedented appointment had been formalized, but more importantly, it had been embraced by those who would make its success or failure possible. General Wellington approached Alexander as the last of the soldiers departed the courtyard. "Commander," he said with a smile, "I believe that was the most successful military appointment ceremony I have ever witnessed. Your men have made it clear that they believe in you and your ability to lead them effectively." Alexander nodded, still processing the emotional impact of the morning's events. "General, I hope I can live up to their expectations. They deserve leadership that puts their welfare